We are getting a jarring, visceral look at the reality of President Trump's cruel immigration crackdowns across the U.S. The Weekend Primetime has exclusively obtained extensive security video footage of an immigration raid at a home owned by a U.S. citizen in Chicago's wealthy Lakewood neighborhood. In this clip, you can see a federal agent jump the fence of the home, targeting construction workers who were on private property. A tenant whose face we are covering for her own privacy and safety told the agent in no uncertain terms that they do not have a warrant to enter her property. In another dramatic clip, you see agents try to pull a man out of a second-story window. Watch.
Close the window, close the window, close the window, now.
Oh, a lot of people know.
Yeah. You have no permission to be on my property.
You don't have permission for enter. Hey! Come on. Deja la camisa, deja la camisa.
The Chicago Sun-Times reports that 2 of the 4 men who were targeted at this home were arrested. It also reports agents tear-gassed neighbors on the residential block. We asked DHS which departments were involved and if warrants were filed. They responded with a statement reading in part, quote, Border Patrol agents were swarmed by agitators during enforcement operations near Lakewood Avenue in Chicago. The agitators obstructed federal law enforcement and ignored multiple warnings to disperse and continue to impede operations, including trying to deflate a vehicle's tire. Joining us now, Leo Feller, whose home you just saw in those images there. Also with us is Andrea Flores, Vice President of Immigration Policy and Campaigns at Forward.us. Leo, I want to start with you. Thank you so much for joining this. I'm sure this has been a difficult and traumatic experience. We've spoken before. You came home last night to blood all over your house. What happened? And did anyone ever show you or your tenant a warrant?
So thank you for having me on, Catherine. No, there were no warrants shown. This was a really surprising and jarring and frightening attack. The gates were locked. The federal immigration agents jumped over the gates and onto the property. The workers ran into the house. My tenant was the one who was home at the time. She's a young 20-year-old woman. She let the workers come into the back stairwell. The workers came into my unit. You can see there in the images the amount of blood on the floor. I spent most of the day cleaning up that blood. Surprising that this could happen. And I'm just appalled that in our country, federal agents can jump onto private property, jump onto a balcony of a private property, create this kind of chaos.
Leo, thank you so much for sharing this story with us. I wanted to read to you and our viewers how one of your neighbors described this to the New York Times. I wanted to get your thoughts. They say, in part, we're told by the government that these guys are criminals and rapists and thugs. This guy was just working a construction job, putting siding on a house. Talk to us about who these guys you hired to fix your home were. Are they people in the people in the administration tries to make them out to be, which is paint everybody as criminals and thugs and gangsters and drug dealers?
So I hired a construction company. The construction company then hired these workers, so I didn't hire these workers directly. My understanding is, and my experience with them, is that they are wonderful people. They actually have the door codes to be able to get into my home. I see them, when they are here at 7 a.m. when they start working. I say goodbye to them at dusk when they leave, when it's too dark to continue to work. These are people who I consider friends at this point after 3-4 weeks of getting to know them. They are hardworking individuals. And I think importantly, one point in time, there was an ICE raid in the area about 2 weeks ago. And I asked one of the workers, are you okay? Do you want to go home? Maybe you guys should just stay indoors. And he told me, no, we actually have permission to be here.
Andrea, at risk of sounding a little bit like a yokel here, if something like this had happened in Mississippi and people who weren't supposed to be on my dad's property came in, he would pick up his firearm. What rights do residents have against unlawful entry? And I'm not advocating violence in any way, shape, or form. I'm just thinking about how risky this can be on multiple levels when in certain areas of the United States, the Castle Doctrine does apply.
You're right. It is risky, not just for the workers who were being targeted here, but also for law enforcement themselves. This is not at all how immigration enforcement should be conducted. And there's a reason why you've never seen an administration try and do it this way before. I want to remind viewers that one of the reasons you see cars suddenly pulling up in a video like this is because they have no targeted sort of enforcement priorities in place right now. They have no guardrails. And the reason why they don't have any guardrails on where and when they do enforcement is because Trump ended those. And that was a very extreme move that ends decades and really half a century of the way immigration enforcement was conducted. So you're right. The home is one of the most constitutionally protected zones that we have. And, you have case law, it's very clear whether that is from former Justice Scalia or more recent cases that talk about even a front yard and gates that are locked, that there are procedures that a law enforcement officer has to follow because the Fourth Amendment requires it. So while I don't know all the facts of how ICE planned this operation or what kind of planning went into it, there are some really concerning things that we've seen on that video that suggest that they are not fully respecting both statute on how to conduct an immigration arrest or the Constitution.
Leo, I want to ask you, have you had the chance to speak to any of these men? How are they doing? Are they back at home? Have some of them needed to get medical care? What's happening to them and their families right now?
I spoke to the family of one of the workers who came here, and I know that the workers are going to be, they won't be able to work for several weeks, if not longer. They got stitches, they got medical care. I know at least one was detained, and so I don't know about their whereabouts. I personally am going to donate $10,000 to these workers to help cover their medical care, to help cover the time that they're not able to work. I don't know if the company that I hired, the construction company, will also be able to contribute. But I'm going to do all that I can just to make sure that these workers, who, in my experience, have been really wonderful people, do really, high quality, fantastic work. They are kind, that they'll be taken care of.
What do you think the bigger consequences, Leo, are of incidents like this? I mean, obviously, it affects you, it affects the workers that have been replacing windows on your property. What do you think the broader effects might be?
This affects all of us. And let me give you an example. I'm spending $300,000 renovating a house. About 80% of that is going to buy windows that are manufactured in the United States. Marvin Windows, manufactured in Minnesota, Kansas, and Oregon. And it's going to buy James Hardie board siding, manufactured in Illinois, Alabama, Massachusetts, Texas, right? A tiny fraction of this money is actually going to the installers who are actually putting this up on my house. But most of the money is going to pay for U.S. manufactured construction material. And that means that if people like me say, I'm not going to do construction, right? Why am I going to take this kind of risk of my house being raided? That also means that people aren't going to buy U.S. manufactured construction equipment. That means that these workers who work in these U.S. manufacturing facilities producing these windows and this siding, they're going to have a harder time getting jobs. And so this does have really big spillovers. This is a chilling effect that this will have on the American economy. And keep in mind, housing is one of the biggest drivers of the American economy. It's 1/3 of consumer spending. So creating threats to home remodeling and home construction, that's really going to have a negative effect on the overall U.S. economy, not just on these individual immigrant workers.
So, Andrea, if we're talking about these workers right now, what legal recourse do their families have to try and find out where they are? What kind of help can they get them? Even as we just heard there from Leo, generously, talking about the $10,000 he'll contribute to their medical and perhaps even legal help, and if that of the company. But what, if any, rights do their families have? Do they have while this situation remains in limbo? We don't know who they are. We don't know what their status is. And as we heard, they suggested that they do have permission to be working in the country or to be here.
It's a really big and important question. It's one I don't know if I don't know their status in the country and what type. But I actually want to go back to something that Leo said and that you brought up, is that they said that they had legal permission to work in this country. And that is something that we're seeing a lot in Chicago, and we've seen nationwide, of this administration actually not respecting legal status, whether that's temporary protected status, whether that's deferred action, whether that's parole. And I want to remind people, those are the people who have that status, came forward, got vetted, paid a fee, right? Were told by the U.S. government that they could legally work these jobs, and they're American businesses that hired them. And so the violation that this administration is doing to people with legal status is really an untold story in all of this. And also, the way that the courts are sort of also creating a permission structure, I want to call out, because I don't know what type of legal recourse is possible when we have the Supreme Court, specifically Justice Kavanaugh, really creating a permission structure for enforcement to target certain workplaces where there are Latinos working and where, based on their Latino identity and the language they're speaking and the type of work they're doing, he really said those stops are justified, right? And so I'm concerned that enforcement, before the law is even settled, is already carrying out more and more of stopping, groups of Latino workers outside houses, groups of Latino workers at Home Depots. That is absolutely unconstitutional, but I'm very concerned that a simple concurrence, right, that's not a binding legal opinion, is really going to spread more of this and weaken the types of legal actions that families may have when it comes to challenging this abuse. But I would say the physical harm alone, right, you really have to look, and Leo, and in terms of his legal rights, in terms of his property, there's a lot of open sort of facts here that would concern me and that really suggest bigger violations of the law.
Leo Feller and Andrea Flores, thank you so much for being with us tonight.